Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Fan the Flames, where we believe that everybody has a spark, a desire, an idea inside of them, potential inside of them. And it's our invitation, our work, as it were, to fan that flame, to turn that spark into a roaring fire, a sparkling light, a guiding light. And today I am talking with the one and only Lou Chiu. Lou is a culture and relationship coach even. She's a trainer and a consultant, and she specializes in cultivating cultural wellness and developing intersectional allies. So we're going to dive into some of that as we have our conversation today. And she's just completed research of allyship-informed coaching as part of her master's. So I am so pleased to have her joining with us today. Hey, Lou, welcome to the show.
Hey Rob, always a pleasure to be here and any excuse to chat with you. So yeah, really excited.
So we're going to dive into a little bit about your masters, but before we sort of get into what it was, I guess I'm kind of curious as to what led you to choosing that, because I think that journey is a little bit of your flame and perhaps the flame of others as well.
Yeah, it's I think if you asked me when I was about 4 years old, I don't think it would have been a flame. It would have been walking through a load of ash and smoke and, you know, that fun process of trying to work out who you are when you're growing up. And I had the fun advantage of growing up in looking as I do in a very white community. And so for me, there was always, from a very young age, there was that existential question of, who am I? Where do I fit in all of this? And as part of that, my own research and part of my own soul searching was very much like, who are we and what are we made up of? And yeah, and so one of my core identities is this self-confessed geek, and going down lots of rabbit holes, and yeah, really into kind of philosophy is a huge, like, existentialist philosophy was a huge part of my study, but so was social constructionism. I did the wonderful weird mix of sociology and philosophy as an undergraduate. So I was always going to ask those really big, awkward questions that even now at master's level, my coaching lecturer is just like, do you want to come with a glossary of that?
Love it. I love it. And when you say sort of, you know, how you look, who am I in this world with how I look? For those that are not watching this, but are listening, how would you describe how you look?
So I am, I found this out later. So I have an interesting take on labels that I know not everybody kind of agrees with. But as a university student, I realized that I was BBC. So British born Chinese.
Okay.
And so I confuse both kind of Western, Western people around me because I look Chinese, I look East Asian. I confuse East Asians around me because I don't dress like an East Asian. And and my English is always a little bit too finessed for somebody, for somebody who doesn't, my voice doesn't necessarily look like it fits for some people. And so yes, I was always confusing people.
And I guess that confusing of others and that soul searching kind of led you to the place where you are now. And it's often interesting how when we think about our past experiences, because sometimes we see those as negatives or as challenges, but they also kind of lay the path to where we're going to get to. And sometimes they are what I might describe as the kindling to our fire.
Absolutely. And I think I think because I have a very physical sense of otherness in the environment that I grew up in. I asked these questions from a very young age, but I think we all do it. We all go through that, especially in our awkward teenage years of, well, okay, the choices of clothes that I wear will kind of, indicate this type of thing. Or, we might be embarrassed to bring friends over for lunch because of whatever reason, whether that's down to our kind of class or wealth status, whether that's to do with the fact that our parents are just really embarrassing. There's lots of different reasons. And one of the reasons why I embrace that geekiness of myself and really embracing those different bits that make me is because actually when I'm working with clients, that's the thing they want to talk about. They want to be able to kind of go, I want to come to peace. I want to kind of sit nicely at this campfire that is all of the different aspects of myself, but I feel like I can't be this at work, or I have to show up in a certain way for my family. And so it's actually the things that I've learned from my studies and from my career prior to coaching, but a lot in coaching, is we're just trying to make connections through those bits of otherness that we all have inside of ourselves.
I love that phrase. We're trying to make connections with all those parts of otherness that we have within ourselves. There's something very, I guess it's very existential, and of course it is coming from you, but there's something really lovely about this idea that's what we're all doing. We're all seeking to explore, well, who is it that we are when we look at this sort of patchwork quilt of ourselves and our lives, and when we sort of pull that together, what does that blanket become? And having experienced that in a very sort of, I guess, a rich and very physical, practical, head-on way, you're able to, I guess, enable others to experience that through the work that they do with you.
Yeah, that's the plan, Rob. And I think there's something there that, for us as coaches, for us to be okay with who we are. We come into coaching from so many different experiences and, with different agendas and things like that. And I think if we're able to accept who, not necessarily accept who we are, but we are aware of those different aspects of ourselves and how they might play into our practice, we actually open up so many opportunities for that connection with our clients, because they are also this wonderful, complex, messy self in front of you. And, they will have different relationships with those different aspects of self. And so, it's part of that kind of role modeling aspect of, I am unashamedly a geek, and I will make Marvel superhero references. If that's not okay, just let me know. And it kind of just invites them to bring those pieces of themselves that maybe they're unfamiliar with interacting with other people, or that, in very specific circumstances and spheres.
And that, I think there's something about that word invitation, I think sits a lot with coaching and the work that we do. It's like, it's a constant invitation to show up, a constant invitation to allow all of the self to be explored, the paradoxes and all, the polarities and all. Let's bring it all into the space and have a look at it. And I'm going to bring my all into the space as well. So nobody feels that they are being observed, because everything's there. It's not like I'm looking at you and your stuff. It's like we're looking at stuff, and that's my stuff and your stuff and all stuff, to kind of see what sense do we make of this. So therefore, what do we want to choose to do with it?
Yeah, and I think that can be really scary for some coaches. So the research that I've just been doing, sorry, Rob, just slide that right in.
No, go for it. Let's hear about this research, because I've heard over the years, I've been kind of hearing snippets of the work that you've been doing through the conversations that we've been having, but I'm aware that some of our viewers, our listeners, will have no idea about it. So let's give them the full name of it, and share a little bit about that research, so people can kind of understand the depth to which you're exploring this work as well.
I will try and remember the title of my dissertation that I've just submitted. So it is allyship, adopting allyship in coaching, a call for resistance to epistemic injustice.
Nice. I love it. I love it. So, okay, so let's have the glossary of that. What is it that you're exploring there?
So one of the things that really stood out to me when I was studying coaching at a master's level was so much of what we do as coaches is helping our coachees and, you know, our kind of co-partners work out how do they make sense of the world. And so when we're looking at types of knowledge, we're looking at experiential learning, we're looking at academics, we're looking at, you know, the practical stuff. And so epistemic injustice looks at how knowledge itself is to serve systems of oppression. And so not every group has the same access to types of knowledge. So if we look at the disparities in higher education, people from lower class backgrounds or lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't progress to the same levels. We see the kind of gender gaps in senior levels across different industries. They're all down to things like our education, but also our social knowledge, the idea of it's who you know. And so what my research was looking at was, what can we learn from other disciplines? So as coaching, we only know what we know, even though we borrow a lot from other disciplines.
Yeah.
And so we might be more familiar with psychology, we might be more familiar with therapy or business psychology. And so my argument was, what can we learn from social epistemology? And so the philosophy of how do we share knowledge? How do we distribute knowledge? How do systems of oppression kind of play into those? And so, yeah, the research was, what don't we know as coaches? How do we learn more about it? And so the philosophical term there is our hermeneutical darkness, which I love with the fanning the flames. And so, yeah, the most simple explanation of hermeneutical darkness is we don't know what we don't know.
Nice.
And so my theory or my research was, the things that we don't know is because of where we are in our social positioning. And so as a heteronormative woman, I don't know what the experiences are for the LGBTQ plus communities. That is my ignorance, because that's not where I've been positioned. I benefit from being very close to the ideals of heteronormativity. And so, yeah, it was kind of exploring what can we learn from that in our coaching practice. And so, yeah, it goes from very big philosophical ideas and then adapting them to coaching, where we're looking at things like LGBTQ plus clients might not want to disclose certain things in coaching with a cis heteronormative coach, because they're worried about things like, all right, I'm going to have to explain this to you. And so our first session is me explaining this to you, and actually I don't get anything from it. Or it might be, you know, so it might be coachees who are specifically looking for coaches who look like themselves or come from similar backgrounds or belief systems, because then they don't have to go through that educating the coach. They can just get straight into. But as we've discussed in previous discussions, actually, these are all still based on assumptions, and we are all messy, complex human beings, and we might not feel the same way. And so as coaches, how do we navigate that space?
I think it brings so many thoughts to mind as you were saying that. And one of those is about, how do we as coaches educate ourselves to understand the wider society in which we live? How do we make it clear that what our understanding is of the world in which we live, so people can get closer to us and understand, okay, so, you know, Rob thinks like this, therefore I can bring this to him. But it also made me think about how, because I don't know, sometimes in the coaching, it allows me to ask, I'm going to say better, and we can qualify better at some point, but it allows me to ask better or more interesting questions because I don't have a full understanding. So I guess it gives me a different perspective in the coaching space itself. But it also makes me think about, how do we gain different experiences? So I didn't travel until quite late in life, and I don't travel a lot now. Well, nobody travels a lot right now anyway. But there's something really interesting about how traveling and kind of meeting different cultures in their own spaces gives us those different aspects or perspectives from which we can view individuals.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I love the consultancy work that I get to do. Is they tend to be melting pots, and especially now where people are doing more kind of working from home and organizations are bigger, and we've kind of got global stakeholders, and so part of it presents itself as conflict. And I love conflict. I don't because it's exhausting, but I love it in terms of we can learn so much from this.
Yeah.
And this idea of conflict comes from the way that I understand the world, the way that I make sense of the world is very different from how you make sense of the world. Therefore, one of us is wrong. And so when I'm working with clients, whether it's individuals or organizations, it's going, how do you hold multiple truths in the same space? And it's a big question we ask in coaching, right? Like, just because the client in front of me is presenting in a certain way, if I am not open to the fact that their truths might be different from mine, that dialogue stops, because you kind of then sit with this conflict rather than what you were saying, Rob, which was, oh, tell me more.
and I love that phrase, sitting with multiple truths, because I think that also plays a part in fanning your flame, because we can sit with conflict inside of us. Should I go for that dream, or should I hold on to this steady job? And we can see those two things as conflicting. But if we sit with both of those things, if we hold the steady job and go for the dream, if we can create a higher kind of viewpoint from which to look at that, we can go, well, actually, there isn't a this or a that. There are ands here. And when we feed ands into the fire, then the fire can begin to grow. But it also, I think, takes on a life of its own as well.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, Rob, the image that came to my mind was, again, back to this idea of hermeneutical darkness, if we are looking at our campfire as our source of safety, and as we would have done in the good old caveman days, we're sat around our own campfire, we're nurturing it, and actually we become so scared of that darkness that feels darker because we're so close to our own light. And actually, it's when we start to invite others to come to it, and they invite us to theirs, and we then start sharing this network of wider campfires. We're pushing that darkness further away and further out and starting to illuminate ourselves. And so I think that's why it's so important to build those connections, because that's how we overcome this darkness that we have, by talking to other people, by being open and hearing their experiences, but not, it's that idea of hearing versus listening.
Yeah.
Like really taking in what the world is like for them, rather than, okay, I'm listening to you from my perspective of my world beliefs. I don't necessarily have to adopt what you're saying, but in order to understand you, I am with you where you are in that moment. And I think that for me, that's, in our metaphor, that is the sharing the marshmallows, right? Over the campfire. It's not just that it's there for security and warmth, and it can be more than that. Yeah. But for me, that's about sharing it. It's about sharing our individual campfires and bringing them together. And we have more resources then when we do that, and that's how we kind of build that village rather than just this individual campfire.
And I love that idea of, in my mind's eye, I sort of see these humans with these little fires inside of them, and as they get closer together, those fires start to grow, and they start to see around them and notice that, the fears that sit in the darkness, when we cast light upon it, they're just objects, they're just things, and we have the capability to overcome those things once we start to cast some light onto them. And by coming together, we create a bigger illumination of the world. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I can see it now, like the shadow that's been bouncing off that you think is a monster, and actually when somebody else comes along and their light distorts that image and shows you that actually it's something else, something so much more manageable and understandable. And I think
Yeah.
that fear of other is the fear of threat. Like we don't know if somebody's going to try and harm us in some emotional or physical or mental way, and so we try and keep ourselves small and to ourselves, and because that feels manageable. And I think for me that was the big catalyst for my research, was this paradox of, as social beings, we're shaped by others, we're shaped by the stories that we're told, we're shaped by the expectations that we have, but as coaches we also know that we're only in control of our own selves. And so how do you manage that? And so for me, I really wanted to explore the impact that coaching can have on social change.
And because as you're saying that, I love that idea that, we're responsible for the self, and we unfold our story, but yet the world around us has an impact upon that. And so we're always juggling, what's the impact that we allow in, what's the impact that's seeped in that we're not aware of, and how do we kind of become aware of it and surface that? How do we live the lives that we want to live, whilst recognizing we're trapped, that's an interesting word, isn't it, within the environments that we're in. And it's like, but we have control, and we have power. So we hold the flame, we hold the torch, and it's like, where do we want to put it, and where do we want to start our fires, and where do we want to contain them? Because sometimes I guess it's okay to contain something to feel safe, almost as a recharge, a reset before we go back into the world. And there was something else you said that triggered a thought for me. Oh yeah, the shadow. This idea that we have shadows, but they're cast by ourselves. And it's like those shadows are versions or representations of us. And so when we look at them, what is it that we see when we're looking there? And how might we face those in a way that's about acceptance, as opposed to hiding or discarding?
Yeah, I love that. And as you were speaking, I've recently been working with a client around, so they are very much a giver. And they are in the space of mental health and support, and they're going through a really hard time themselves. And we've all been there as coaches, or we will be if you're new and shiny. Of it's so easy to help other people, absolutely cannot follow your own advice. And in that metaphor, yes, Rob in that space. Yeah, me too. And part of that is, if in that metaphor, when we're seeing other people, we can see where the shadow connects to them, but because we're in it, we can't see where our own shadow like connects to us. And so that's why we help each other out.
Yeah. And I think there's something so, I guess, humbling to recognize that we don't always follow the advice that we might give, or we don't always follow what we know to be supportive and helpful. We do the things as well that don't help ourselves. And it's just kind of interesting to notice what's going on for oneself that happens. But I also think it's great to know that coaches have their own failings, that coaches have their own shadows, because often we can look at coaches as having all the answers, as opposed to being in the darkness with everybody else. searching for answers and searching for ways through with their own light, as opposed to being the sun that understands everything, as it were.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing. So in the study of allyship, one of the things that we look at with the things that we look at is what motivates allies. And so for allies who are motivated by preserving the power for the in-group within systems of oppression, but also looking at self-service, it manifests as like the saviour complex. And so these marginalized communities, they just need someone to come in and fix it for them. And the idea of being the sun, being the hero figure, actually, you cast darker shadows. The brighter you shine, you're casting darker, more obvious shadows. So actually that you make more problems that maybe didn't exist in the beginning, because what you're still perpetuating colonialistic or patriarchal ideas of, I'll fix it. That's, they just need a hero. And so I think that's important for us as coaches. Why do we do what we do? What space do we come into as we do that? Because it's when we don't know about stuff like that, when we don't have the language to describe those concepts, we carry on doing it. And so if we don't ask those questions of, okay, we talk about the saviour complex in coaching and how it's problematic, but actually when you introduce things like neurodiversity and race and all of these very personal identity aspects, and if we kind of overlook that, we're potentially doing more harm than we are good.
That's something really interesting there, isn't it? That makes me think about why has one come into coaching or self-development or into therapy? What is our choice in that, and how might we have come into it for reasons that aren't necessarily healthy or helpful all the time? Because sometimes we come into it because we do want to help people, but if we are too kind of, I don't know, headstrong in that I'm going to help you, then we create issues and challenges as well, because we're not actually seeing the person where they are, but also we're assuming that we know how to help. We're assuming that we have the answer, which is what I love about coaching, where the assumption is you have the answer, and that actually my job is to help you find your own help, as opposed to be the help, as it were. And there's something, I guess, one has to keep reminding oneself that that's what's happening in this space. I'm not the hero, they're the hero.
Yeah, oh, I absolutely love that. And it's one of the things that really came out for me. I think I put it in my conclusion. And so when we've talked about being shaped by others, for those of you who are not geeks like me, it's a social constructionist idea of, the labels that are around, how we're shaped by the beliefs and the people and the systems around us. And it's a similar thing that's shared in coaching and in existentialism, which is all of this stuff is real. All of the relationships that we have, the things that we are influenced by, they are all real. But they all share in the optimism that things can change.
Yeah.
And I think for us as coaches, and it's really hard, I think, for coaches working in social justice or social change, because it can feel overpowering, it can feel too big. And so, yeah, one of my kind of goals is bringing coaches who want to make this change together. And that's why I love speaking with you, Rob, and being introduced to more coaches, because like you said, sometimes it's okay to protect your own fire and your own flame, because you're overburdened, you're exhausted. And the work that I do supporting allies is, as allies who are so much more in their hermeneutical darkness because of the positions of privilege that they hold and might be unaware of, they have so much potential to be able to help carry that flame when those of us who are on the receiving end of oppression, when we've just had too much. And so by being able to kind of share the flames around, and being able to take different roles to nurture them when we need to step out. I think that's really important, and for coaches to understand that we don't sit outside of these systems. We are just as influenced by them. Our own belief systems, our own truths, they're all shaped by them. And they will show up in that space, in that wonderful, unique amalgamation of the two, complex, messy. And that's if you're not doing group coaching or facilitation. And so, just knowing that we are all as kind of changeable and shapeable as as flames. How that has an impact.
And I love how you talk about it. There's a real sense here of a nurturing of those flames. It feels like I'm just trying to, my head's playing with the metaphor here, but it's almost like you're a gatherer of different kinds of wood. You go out and you find what's the wood that's going to burn brightest or longest, or give the right scent, and you collect that information, you bring it, and then you share it out to others and go, look what I found, look the understanding that this finding has created. Now that I found it, I'm going to give it to you, and now you see what you can understand from it. And I think that that we all need the geeks like you in our world that go out and find this language and bring it back and go, here, look, this is how we can describe this. This is how we can explore what our flames mean to us, or that bit of orange in your flame, this is what that's about. Let's explore that and create more red or more blue or more green in there.
Yeah, I love that. And it's always a huge compliment to hear that we need more geeks like me, because there is that, there is that place. I think it's important. I think it's important that we as coaches, not just individually, but as a sector, we learn from, not just the places that we've very naturally kind of moved into. It's very exciting that coaching is so interested in neuroscience in particular at the moment. I think that's great. But with the things that are going on around the world in our cultural climate right now, why are we not looking more at critical race theory? Why are we not looking more at different centered research paradigms? Why are we not looking at all of these other types of disciplines that might actually help us understand the connections that we're making? And that's not me poo-pooing neuroscience. I think it's great, but I am not a science brain. I am a people, social anthropologist, philosophy brain. But I think there's value in all of the things that we're interested in. My frustration through my research has been, but why those things are not this stuff?
And I think there's something really, I just want to say interesting, but I don't think it's interesting. I think it's almost challenging, because I think it can be easier to look at some things than others. It can be more easier on the self to look at science than it can be to look at my perception of others and how I've created otherness, or how I've excluded either through my language or my behaviors. It can be easier to look at, oh, that chemical creates this response than I did this, or there is a history of this in my system. How do I challenge that as an individual and fight against my system? So I think that some of the why we look at some things more than others is the difficulty of looking at those things and rest. I always remember talking with Simon Cavicchia about that sometimes when we have these discussions, shame is evoked. And if we don't nurture that shame and sit with it so it doesn't become a defense, it puts up walls and we can't look at this stuff. And I think that the way in which you describe this work allows people into it and to explore it with you. And I think that's also part of it, is you're doing a with, not an at, which I think is part of the challenge. Is sometimes when we look at the difficult stuff, it feels like it's being kind of given at us, not with us. There is a sense of, you have done this, as opposed to, this has happened, how do we create change?
Yeah. And as somebody who's read through just under 3,000 journal articles across different disciplines, it is really inaccessible. And I'm not, my dissertation isn't the easiest thing to read, but I tried really hard to, and again, it's that idea of, epistemic injustice. Like, as coaches, we don't come from philosophical backgrounds typically. But the concepts there, I think, are really important and valuable. And so, I love the fact that in our metaphor, I have the people in my life who can help me nurture my campfire whilst I've taken out several torches and just wandered off into the wilderness and bringing some stuff back, maybe some new people with me, and and just trying to kind of make sense of what we found and how we might use that. And I think this has been really helpful for me, Rob, because there's been like a whole anxiety for me going, did I go down too academic? Do I make sense? Do I just sit in this weird space again? And like my 5-year-old being at school and not fitting in is like sat there for a couple of weeks in submission. So it's been really helpful to kind of hear, okay, no, this is fine. I'm going off and wandering and bringing some stuff back that may or may not be helpful.
Yeah, and because a question that was running through my mind was, what is it that supports your flame? Because I hear a lot about the work that you do and how that will impact, influence, and support others, whether that's through understanding, whether it's through new language, whether it's through the challenge, and the idea of how do we work with the conflict to create the understanding. And as you were talking there, it felt like part of what nurtures your flame is somebody who sits around the campfire going, no, it's okay, go off and find and bring back. But for you, what does that sound like?
So one of the things that I've kind of learned, and again, it comes from this idea of we're all messy, complex humans. And so it's not that I'm beholden to one person to provide those different aspects of things for me. And so I've got an amazing core group of friends and loved ones. But now, as I'm pursuing more of this work, I'm finding myself, I'm reaching out to other, wider East Asian communities, because some of the challenges that I'm struggling with, because I'm being so open and vulnerable in predominantly white male spaces when I'm working with organizations. And it's, having an excellent supervisor, and I'm currently now looking for a different centered therapist to kind of help me go through some of the things that have triggered me through doing the research. And so I think that's always in review, and there will be people who come in and out of your life, and to serve a certain purpose. And I don't mean that in a utilitarian kind of way, because we give back, right? But I think as we start to acknowledge those different parts of ourselves, we also realize there are different needs. And so one of the ways that I look after myself is every Wednesday night I am there playing Magda the Meanderer rogue in my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Like, I need that. I just need that.
I love it because there is, they're part of what fans one's flame is play, right? It's that play and that creativity. It's we don't have to be focused and on it all the time. There is, how do you sit back and play? Because in that play, new ideas come. Parts of us are able to rest and recharge. Oh, I love that. So Lou, as always, it's an absolute pleasure having these conversations with you. I feel like I could speak to you forever and a day. So we'll definitely get you back to kind of look at the dissertation and where that's taking you, and where that work is kind of growing and developing. So people want to get hold of you. What's the best way for them to do that?
The best way to do is to drop me an email. So I'm at hello@louchiu.com. It'll be spelled out for you in the links below. My website is louchiu.com. If you want to find out what I'm up to, there's some really exciting stuff coming up soon. So I'm on socials, but they're all kind of linked through my website. But yeah, email's the best way if you want to get in contact and have a chat, because I absolutely would love that.
Brilliant. Awesome. I'll make sure I put those in the show notes. Lou, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
It's always so much fun. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Cheers.